My HOA tried to fine me $5,000 for a violation, so I exposed their secret scam in front of the whole neighborhood. I will never forget the sound of that gavel, not because it was loud, but because it was the sound of someone's power finally breaking. The judge leaned forward, stared straight at the HOA president, and said, "You don't have the authority to enforce this. In fact, your conduct borders on harassment." The courtroom went dead silent. I watched as Marlene, our HOA president, went pale, her lips parting like she was about to argue, but no words came out. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, you owe them nothing. Case dismissed." Marlene didn't just lose the case. She lost her reputation. She lost her control, and within 3 weeks she lost her position. Because I did not just beat her, I exposed her. And the funniest part, it all started because my trash can was visible. My name is Ryan Carter, and I am 34-year-old. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood called Willow Ridge Estates. The kind of place with identical lawns, matching mailboxes, and neighbors who smile at you while secretly counting how many weeds you have. I moved here about 2 years ago after my divorce. Nothing dramatic, no cheating, no screaming. Just one of those slow, painful endings where you realize the marriage has turned into two strangers sharing the same roof. After the divorce, I wanted one thing, peace. So when I found this neighborhood, I thought I hit the jackpot. It was calm, it was clean, it was safe. Sure, it had an HOA, but I told myself, how bad can it really be? I had never lived under an HOA before, but the realtor assured me it was well managed and kept property values high. At the time, that sounded like a good thing. And for the first year it was. I kept my yard neat. I paid my dues on time. I waved at neighbors. I stayed out of drama. I worked as a systems analyst, mostly remote, and my life was pretty simple. Work, gym, groceries, home. The only real project I had was fixing up my backyard slowly. I wanted to build a small patio, maybe add a fire pit, just something to make the place feel like mine. Because after a divorce, your home is not just a building. It is your reset button, your proof that life can start again. And I was finally starting to feel like I belonged until Marlene decided I didn't. Marlene Watkins was in her late 50s, always wearing expensive sunglasses and an expression like the world owed her something. She lived on the corner lot in a big house with white columns, the type of place that screamed, "I'm important." She was the HOA president, and I did not understand how much power she thought she had until the first time she came to my door. It was a Saturday morning. I was in gym shorts, holding a mug of coffee, enjoying the rare feeling of peace. Then I heard a knock, not a normal knock, a sharp, impatient knock. When I opened the door, Marlene was standing there with a clipboard, a pen, and that same tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked past me into my house like she owned it. Then she said, "Good morning, I'm Marlene, HOA president." I nodded politely. "Nice to meet you." She didn't shake my hand. Instead, she pointed toward my driveway. "You left your trash bin out." I blinked. Yeah, trash pickup was yesterday. I forgot to pull it in." She sighed dramatically like I had confessed to murder. "Well, that is a violation." I actually laughed, thinking she was joking. She didn't laugh back. She flipped her clipboard and started reading like a prosecutor. "Per Willow Ridge Estates HOA guidelines, trash receptacles must be stored out of public view within 12 hours of collection." I stared at her. It had been sitting by my garage door for maybe 18 hours. I said, "Okay, I'll bring it in." She wrote something down. "This will be a warning. Next time will be a fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But I didn't want conflict, so I just said, "Sure, thanks for letting me know." Marlene's smile grew, not warm, not friendly, satisfied, like she had just reminded me who was in charge. Then she turned and walked away without another word. And as she walked down my driveway, I noticed something strange. She didn't just leave. She looked around my yard, my porch, my mailbox, like she was searching for more reasons to come back. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the start of her obsession with me. For the next few weeks, I was extra careful, trash bin always inside, grass cut perfectly, no packages left out, no car parked on the street overnight. I played by the rules. Then one day, I got a letter in the mail, not from the HOA office, from Marlene herself. The envelope had my name typed in bold letters like it was official court paperwork. Inside was a violation notice. Violation, unauthorized lawn decoration. Fine, $75. I read it 3 times. Unauthorized lawn decoration. I walked outside and looked around. The only thing on my lawn was a small wooden sign that said, "Welcome." That sign had been there since I moved in. It was literally part of the landscaping package. I was so confused I actually laughed. Then I saw Marlene's handwriting at the bottom. Remove within 24 hours to avoid additional penalties. That laugh died instantly, because it wasn't about the sign. It was about control. So I went to the HOA website and pulled up the rules. It said nothing about a welcome sign. Nothing. I even looked at the neighborhood entrance where Marlene had a seasonal wreath and decorative lights. I thought, is she serious? I decided to handle it politely. I emailed the HOA board. I wrote, "Hello, I received a fine for a welcome sign. Could you please clarify which guideline this violates? The sign has been here since I moved in." 2 days later, I got a response, not from the HOA board, from Marlene, one sentence. "It violates the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood." I stared at my screen like I was reading satire. Aesthetic harmony? That wasn't even real. That was just a fancy way of saying because I said so I replied calmly. "I reviewed the guidelines. There is no rule against welcome signs. Please provide the specific section number." No response. Instead, the next week I got another letter. Additional fine, $150 reason, failure to comply. Now I was furious, but I still didn't want drama. So I decided to go to the HOA meeting, because surely in person this would get cleared up. Surely there were reasonable adults involved. I was wrong. The HOA meetings were held at the community clubhouse, a beige building that smelled like carpet cleaner and power trips. When I walked in, about 15 people were sitting in folding chairs. Most of them were older. Most of them looked bored. And at the front table, like a queen on her throne, sat Marlene. She had a binder in front of her and a smug expression like she was about to enjoy herself. I took a seat and waited. The meeting started with basic stuff: budget, landscaping, pool maintenance. Then Marlene cleared her throat and said, "Next, we will address homeowner violations." She flipped through papers dramatically. Then she said my name out loud. "Ryan Carter, Lot 27. Every head turned toward me. I felt my stomach tighten. Marlene smiled like she was about to embarrass me on purpose. She held up my violation notice. "Mr. Carter has refused to remove an unauthorized sign from his front lawn." I raised my hand and said, "Excuse me, but there's no rule against it." Marlene leaned back in her chair. "Oh, there is. We have discretion." I said, "Discretion doesn't mean you can invent rules." A few people murmured. Marlene's smile tightened. She looked at the board members beside her, 2 men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Then she said, "The board agrees this sign is not appropriate." I looked at the board members. One of them avoided eye contact. The other one shrugged slightly like he didn't care. I said, "So you're fining me based on personal opinion?" Marlene snapped, "Based on community standards." I replied, "Then why do you have decorative items at your own house?" "I've seen wreaths and lights." The room went quiet. Marlene's face hardened. "That is completely different." I said, "How?" She leaned forward and said slowly like she was talking to a child, "Because my decorations are tasteful." Some people chuckled, not because it was funny, because they were scared to disagree. My face burned with anger, and then Marlene said something that made my blood go cold. "If you don't like our rules, Mr. Carter, perhaps Willow Ridge Estates is not the right place for you." That was the moment I realized something. This wasn't about a welcome sign. This was about pushing me out. And I had no idea why, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going anywhere. A week later, I found out why Marlene was targeting me. It wasn't personal. It was financial. I was outside washing my car when my neighbor, an older guy named Frank, walked over. Frank was in his 60s, retired, friendly, the kind of neighbor who actually cared about people. He leaned against my fence and said casually, "HOA giving you trouble?" I sighed. "Yeah. Marlene hates my welcome sign, apparently." Frank chuckled, then shook his head. "Welcome to Willow Ridge," I asked. "Why is she like this?" Frank looked around like he didn't want to be overheard. Then he lowered his voice. "Because she wants your house." I blinked. "What?" Frank nodded. "She wanted that property for her nephew. He's trying to buy in this neighborhood, but you bought it first." I stared at him. "That's insane." Frank shrugged. "Not really. She's been doing it for years. She targets people until they sell. She did it to the Johnsons. She did it to the Harris couple. She almost got them." I felt my stomach twist. "You're telling me she's harassing homeowners to force them out?" Frank nodded slowly. "She calls it protecting property values. But really, she wants control. She wants to decide who lives here." I stood there stunned, because suddenly everything made sense. The way she looked around my yard that first day. The way she said maybe this neighborhood wasn't right for me. She didn't want me here. She wanted me gone. And now it wasn't just about a welcome sign. It was war. After that conversation, I started documenting everything. Every letter, every email, every photo. I bought a small security camera for my front porch. Not because I was paranoid, because I knew Marlene wasn't done, and I was right. 2 weeks later, I got another violation notice. Violation, unauthorized exterior modification. Fine. $500. I read it and immediately felt rage. Exterior modification? I hadn't modified anything, so I went outside and looked. Nothing was different. Then I noticed the problem, my mailbox. Someone had knocked it slightly crooked, not broken, just crooked enough to look improper. I stared at it. Then I looked across the street. Marlene was standing on her porch watching me. Even from a distance, I could see her smug smile. I fixed the mailbox, and I knew deep down she had done it, or had someone do it. Then came the next one. Violation, lawn maintenance failure. Fine. $250 it was because I had 2 brown patches of grass from the summer heat. Meanwhile, half the neighborhood had the same patches, but only I got fined. Then came the worst one, the letter that made my hands shake. Final notice violation, unapproved backyard structure fine, $5,000. My stomach dropped. Backyard structure, I ran to my backyard. The only structure was my half-built patio, a few bricks stacked neatly, some gravel. No permanent installation, no fence, no gazebo, nothing. I had not even started building. I had just placed materials there. I read the notice again. It said if I didn't remove it within 48 hours, the HOA would take legal action and place a lien on my house. A lien over bricks. I felt sick. This was no longer petty. This was an attempt to financially destroy me. And the worst part, they were betting I would panic, they were betting I would pay, but I had something Marlene didn't expect. I had patience. And I had receipts. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the lien, about losing my house, about being forced to sell, and I realized something terrifying. HOAs can actually ruin people. They can drain you with fines, legal fees, and stress until you give up. And Marlene knew that. She was counting on it. The next morning I called the HOA office number. No answer, so I drove to the clubhouse. The door was locked. I waited until I saw Marlene's car in the parking lot, then I walked up to her as she got out. "Marlene," I said. She looked at me like I was a bug. "Yes," I held up the notice. "This $5,000 fine is insane." "I haven't built anything," she smiled. "It doesn't matter, you did not submit an architectural request." I said, "It's a stack of bricks," she shrugged. "Then remove them." I stepped closer. "This is harassment." "You're targeting me." Marlene's eyes narrowed. Then she leaned in and said quietly, "You should have sold when you had the chance." My heart pounded. I said, "Excuse me?" She smiled sweetly. "You heard me, some neighborhoods have standards. Some people just don't fit." And then she walked away, like she had just threatened me without ever raising her voice. I stood there in the parking lot, shaking with anger, and that's when I decided. I was done being polite. I was done being quiet. If she wanted war, I would give her one, but I would fight smart. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, not some expensive corporate lawyer. A local guy named Dennis who specialized in property disputes. I sat in his office and showed him the letters, the fines, the emails. He raised his eyebrows higher and higher as he read. Then he leaned back and said, "Ryan, this is not normal." I asked, "Can they really put a lien on my house?" Dennis nodded. "They can try, but it doesn't mean it will hold up in court." I said, "What do I do?" Dennis looked at me seriously. "You document everything, and you find out if they're violating their own bylaws." That's when he asked the most important question. "Do you have the HOA bylaws and financial records?" I blinked. "No," Dennis smiled. "Then that's where we start." Dennis explained something I never knew. HOAs are required to provide certain documents to homeowners. Budgets, meeting minutes, bylaws, and if they refuse, that's a problem. So we sent an official written request, certified mail. I requested all bylaws and enforcement guidelines, financial records for the past 2 years, meeting minutes, proof of board votes for my fines, architectural committee rules. 2 weeks passed. No response. Then I got a letter, not with documents, with another fine. Violation, hostile communication with board members. Fine, $300. I actually laughed out loud. Hostile communication, because I asked for records. Dennis wasn't laughing. He said, "This is good." I blinked. "How is this good?" He smiled. "Because now they're making mistakes." Dennis suggested I start talking to other homeowners, not just Frank, everyone, so I did. I knocked on doors. I introduced myself, and slowly I started hearing stories. A young couple told me Marlene fined them for having a stroller on their porch. An elderly widow told me Marlene threatened to tow her son's car when he visited. A family with kids said Marlene tried to fine them because their basketball hoop was too loud. Every story was the same: petty fines, threats, harassment. And then Frank told me the worst one. He said Marlene's nephew had been trying to buy in the neighborhood for years. But every time a house went on sale, Marlene made sure her nephew got first chance. And if someone refused, she made their life hell. I started realizing this wasn't just bullying. This was corruption, and I wasn't the only target. I was just the newest one, so I started collecting statements. Written statements. Signed. Neighbors were hesitant at first. They were scared. But once they realized I was actually fighting back, more and more people joined. Because everyone was tired. Tired of being controlled. Tired of living under fear. And the more people talked, the more I started seeing the cracks in Marlene's perfect image. Then came the moment that changed everything. One night around 2 a.m. my phone buzzed. It was my security camera alert. I opened the live feed, and my blood ran cold. It was Marlene, standing on my lawn, holding something. She looked around, then walked toward my stacked patio bricks. She bent down, and she sprayed something on them. I watched in disbelief. She sprayed paint. Then she stepped back and took photos, like she was creating evidence. I felt my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I recorded the footage and saved it immediately. The next morning, I went outside. There was bright red spray paint on my bricks. It looked like vandalism. It looked like a violation. And I knew exactly what she was going to do. Sure enough, at 9 a.m., I got an email from Marlene. Subject line, final compliance warning. She attached photos she had taken herself. She wrote, "Your construction materials have been defaced and are now unsightly. If not removed, the board will proceed with legal enforcement." I stared at the email. Then I stared at the video footage. And for the first time since this started, I smiled, because she had just done something incredibly stupid. She didn't just harass me, she committed a crime, and she did it on camera. I forwarded the footage to Dennis. He replied within minutes, "Do not confront her, let her dig deeper." That's when we decided to set a trap. Dennis advised me to reply politely, so I wrote, "Thank you for notifying me. I will review this issue and respond accordingly." Then I waited, and sure enough, Marlene escalated. She sent another letter demanding I pay the $5,000 fine within 10 days or they would begin lien proceedings. Then she sent a notice for a special HOA hearing where I would be given the opportunity to defend myself. It wasn't a hearing. It was an execution. She was planning to humiliate me again. But this time, I was ready. The clubhouse was packed that night, more packed than I'd ever seen it, because I had quietly told neighbors what was happening, and people were curious. Marlene sat at the front table like always, dressed like she was attending a gala. She looked confident. She looked excited, like she couldn't wait to crush me. When the meeting started, she tapped her microphone and said, "This hearing is to address the repeated violations committed by Mr. Ryan Carter." Then she began listing them like a judge reading charges. Trash bin, mailbox, welcome sign, grass, patio materials, and finally, unsightly vandalism caused by negligence. I raised my hand calmly. "Yes," Marlene smirked. "Do you have anything to say for yourself before the board votes on enforcement?" I stood up. I could feel every eye in the room on me, and I said calmly, "Yes, I do." I pulled out my laptop. Marlene's smile faded slightly. I plugged it into the projector. Marlene's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" I said, "presenting evidence?" She snapped, "You are not authorized to use that projector." I looked at the room, then I looked at her, and I said, "I'm a homeowner paying dues. I think I'm authorized to defend myself." People murmured. Marlene's face tightened. Then she said, "Fine, be quick." I clicked play, and the video appeared on the big screen. The footage showed my front yard at night. Then Marlene walked into frame. Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "Is that Marlene?" Marlene froze in her chair. On the screen, she looked around nervously, then walked to my bricks and sprayed them. Red paint, then she took photos, then she walked away. The video ended. The room was dead silent. I turned to face everyone. Then I looked at Marlene. She was pale. Her mouth was slightly open. She looked like she had just been caught stealing. And I said, "So, I have a question." I pointed at her. "Is vandalizing my property part of your HOA duties?" The room exploded. People started shouting. "What the hell is this? She did that. She's been harassing everyone. This is illegal." Marlene stood up, shaking. "That video is fake," I laughed once. "Fake, Marlene, that's you, in your own clothes, in your own car. On my camera." Then I pulled out printed screenshots, and I held up her email. "The email you sent me this morning with the photos you took of the vandalism you caused." Marlene stammered. I was inspecting," someone shouted. "At 2 in the morning." Another neighbor yelled, "You psycho." Marlene slammed her hands on the table. "This meeting is over," but she couldn't stop it. The neighborhood had finally seen her true face, and they weren't going to forget it. The next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Neighbors were calling me, texting me, thanking me. Some were furious, some were shocked. And one thing became clear. Marlene had been terrorizing this community for years. She just finally got caught. But Marlene didn't give up. No, she did what all bullies do when they get exposed. She doubled down. 3 days later, I received court papers. The HOA was suing me. They claimed I had defamed Marlene, disrupted HOA operations, and refused compliance. They wanted legal fees. They wanted fines. They wanted me to be forced to remove my patio materials. And they wanted to place a lien on my home. It was insane, but Dennis smiled when I showed him. He said, "They just handed us the rope they're going to hang themselves with." Dennis and I went deeper. We subpoenaed HOA financial records. And when those records finally arrived, my jaw dropped. Because the HOA funds were not being used properly. There were thousands of dollars spent on landscaping repairs that never happened. Payments made to a contractor company that had no website, no reviews, no public record. A company name that sounded generic, Green Line Property Services. Dennis did a quick search and found something even more shocking. Green Line Property Services was registered under Marlene's nephew's name. My blood ran cold. Dennis leaned back and said, "Ryan, your HOA president is stealing from the community." We dug further. Meeting minutes were altered. Votes were recorded that never happened. And the board members? They were either clueless or complicit. The more we uncovered, the uglier it got. Marlene wasn't just a bully. She was running the HOA like a personal business. She would issue fines, collect money, and funnel HOA funds into her nephew's contractor company. And no one questioned it, because no one wanted to be her next target. Until me. Until the guy who refused to fold. The day of court, Marlene showed up wearing her best suit, acting like she was a victim. She sat at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer. She wouldn't look at me, but I could tell she was nervous. Because this wasn't an HOA meeting where she could control the narrative. This was real court, real consequences. The judge started by asking her lawyer to explain the case. Her lawyer claimed I was a problem homeowner who refused to follow rules and publicly humiliated the HOA president. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, your response?" Dennis stood up calmly and said, "Your Honor, we have video evidence of Miss Watkins trespassing and vandalizing Mr. Carter's property." Marlene's head snapped up. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Video evidence?" Dennis nodded. "We also have financial records showing HOA funds being directed to a company owned by Miss Watkins' nephew without proper board approval." The judge's face hardened. Marlene's lawyer immediately stood up. "Objection irrelevant," the judge cut him off. "If this is true, it is extremely relevant." Dennis then played the footage in court. Marlene looked like she was going to faint. The judge watched the entire clip in silence. When it ended, he leaned forward and asked Marlene directly, "Miss Watkins, is that you?" Marlene's voice trembled. I don't recall." The judge's eyes narrowed. "You don't recall being on someone's lawn at 2 in the morning?" Marlene's lawyer tried to step in. But it was too late. The judge was already disgusted. Dennis presented the email, the photos, the financial documents, and then the signed neighbor statements describing her harassment. Marlene's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Finally, the judge leaned back and said the words I will never forget. "Case dismissed." Then he looked at Marlene like she was dirt on his shoe. "And Miss Watkins, I strongly suggest you seek legal counsel regarding potential criminal liability." Marlene's face turned white. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't just losing this case, she was losing everything. After court, news spread fast. Neighbors demanded an emergency HOA election. Marlene tried to resist. She sent emails claiming the judge was biased, claiming I had edited footage, claiming she was being targeted. But no one believed her anymore. The board members resigned one by one. Within 2 weeks, Marlene was removed. Then came the next blow. The community audited the HOA finances. And when the audit confirmed the fraud, Marlene's nephew's company was exposed as a fake operation. The neighborhood filed a police report. Marlene didn't just lose her HOA presidency, she was investigated. And while I don't know exactly what happened legally after that, I do know this. She put her house up for sale, and her nephew never moved into Willow Ridge. Instead, I heard rumors he left the state. Funny how fast people run when their scam collapses. A month later, I finished my patio. I installed the fire pit. I put up string lights. And yes, I kept my welcome sign, because it wasn't about the sign. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could control everyone. One evening, Frank came over with a beer. He sat down, looked around my backyard, and said, Well, guess you won, I smiled. No, we won, Frank nodded. Then he said something that stuck with me. You know what the scary part is? I asked. What? He looked toward the street. People like Marlene exist everywhere. They just survive because nobody challenges them. I stared at the fire pit flames and thought about how close I came to giving up, about how easy it would have been to just pay the fines and keep quiet. And then I realized something. Bullies don't stop because they get tired. They stop because someone finally says no. And I was proud that this time that someone was me. Because the truth is, Marlene never cared about property values. She cared about power. And the moment she realized she couldn't scare me anymore was the moment her whole empire collapsed. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that peace is not something you're given. Sometimes you have to fight for it.